Newmans and the Southalls. And what I found very interesting was, and I dare say, not being a Quaker, I didn't know how much intermarriage there was between various families. And this quite surprised me, perhaps surprised me. I understand it, of course, for the very reasons of their primary existence. What also made things a little bit more difficult was that they tended to call, baptize their children with very similar names. So, not baptized, sorry. There we are. Thank you for that comment. Just named, was it? Thank you for that. Right. There's a primary mistake. Right. They tended to name their children, and I don't know whether this is true today, by the same name. So there, when we look at these families, for example, the Prichards, who were the prime Quakers in the 17th century in this area, the first three were called Roger. When we come to the Newmans, there's several Henrys, and so many Henrys that Henry Stanley had to add Stanley so that he wasn't confused with his uncle, who was called Henry. And you will see from later pictures that the physical resemblance is so strong that I'm sure they would have been well advised to wear little labels like we're wearing today. Now, I do apologise for this slide because it misses off the very first person who should be on here, who is Roger Prichard of Almley. And he lived from about 1600 to 1679, and he was the person that gave the land for the first Quaker meeting house in Almley, the famous black and white one, which I understand is still being used. Now, Roger Prichard, again, once you start one step with family history, you have to take another half a dozen, don't you? And it appears that Roger Prichard actually came from Ireland. Now, I don't know why. Prichard is a very Welsh name, and I didn't go any further back because I thought, well, I've only got an hour or so to talk, so I won't go too far back. Anyway, he set up the first Quaker meeting house in Almley. He was succeeded by Edward Prichard, also of Almley. Edward Prichard knew William Penn and actually bought 2,500 acres in Pennsylvania, which he visited. But my notes tell me that he preferred Almley, so he sold his land to other Quakers in America and returned. He was succeeded by Roger Prichard II, who married Elizabeth Smith of Godalming. Now, again, this Godalming connection is interesting, but I haven't explored it simply for a matter of time. But the Godalming connection is quite interesting. Roger Prichard and Elizabeth had a son whom luckily they called Edward, and he married Mary Westbrook of Godalming in 1754. And this is when the story begins to affect Leominster, because they had three children: Mary Prichard, John Prichard, and Anne Prichard. And Anne Prichard married George Newman of Godalming in, I haven't got the date down here. Anyway, George Newman lived from 1774 to 1845, and he moved to Leominster in 1826 when he retired from business. I understand that he was a leather seller and courier, and he'd obviously done very well. One aspect of this history, which again I find fascinating, and I'm sure it's something which you're all obviously familiar with, but I wasn't. The Quakers, as Anne has explained to us, began very much as dissenters and as a persecuted minority. What happened to make Quakers respectable and successful and influential in certain areas. It's to me, that is an interesting philosophical or religious question, if you like. What happened to that current of dissent? Why, as Anne has explained, in 1688 did they decide, yes, we won't rebel against the crown? Of course, if you're being persecuted, I suppose you make that decision. What is the alternative? But the so-called, in inverted commas, respectability of Quakers in the 19th century certainly interests me. George Newman had made quite a bit of money, obviously, so he retired from business and moved to 46 Etnam Street to be near his wife's brother. Now, this story gets complicated because Mary Pritchard married John Southall of Leominster, and they were living in Leominster, and so to be near his wife's sister, George Newman moved to Leominster. Let's try the next slide, please. Oh yes, now you wonder why structural botany occurs. The Newmans are a fascinating family and very talented. Anne and George had 4 children. Edward Newman, 1801 to 1876. George Newman, 1808 to 1847. Josiah Newman, 1812 to 1884, and Henry Newman, 1818 to 1908. And I'm going to deal with them briefly, well, one of them not so briefly, in that order. And Edward Newman became the British authority on entomology. He published a book on British butterflies and on the history of British ferns. He was not born in Leominster, he was actually born in Hampstead. So, you know, there's a business connection there, I would imagine, as to why they were down in that area. He says that he was interested in local natural history almost from the time he was born, from his nurse's arms, he explains. He wrote books on birds nesting, an ornithological dictionary, a book on British moths, and as I said, the classic book on British ferns. He had joined his father in business at the age of 16 in Guildford, and then moved to Deptford in 1826. He was a founder member of the Entomological Club of Great Britain with Edward Doubleday, and he became editor of the journal in 1832. And in 1833 he was made a fellow of the Linnaean Society. So obviously, I think what we would say a high flyer, obviously an academic, but more than an academic, because the reports suggest that he was not a dry academic, he was a person who wrote with literary flair. These pictures are obviously from his notebooks, and this is where I owe a particular debt, as I say, to Eric Turton, who had acquired this material. And I just put it on just to show you what he was doing. Next one, please. And this is the other things he was doing. That's fine. It's my photograph. It's just for illustrative purposes only, really. And the next one, please. So you can see he was a scientist of, I think, obviously some accomplishment. Now, how does that tie into Leominster? Well, he didn't live in Leominster, but he visited Leominster very often because his brother and his father were living at 46 Etnam Street. And there's a lovely little description of a visit he made in 1832. They'd moved in 1826, if you remember. In 1832, he visited Leominster with his nearest friend and second self, as he called him, Edward Doubleday, also a lepidopterist. They travelled by night from London for 14 hours in continuous drizzle on the roof of the Worcester Mail. Came to Worcester, and then after breakfast proceeded where we sat silent, weary, mopish, sleepy and uncomfortable until we reached Leominster. I think that's a lovely description. We've read about these things in Dickens and that sort of thing, but travelling on the top of a coach through drizzle is something which I think we would not like to repeat. When he came to Leominster, being very interested in ferns, he helped to set up a fernery at 46 Etnam Street, which was later developed into a proper fern garden. And, as we shall hear later, when Josiah Newman built his new house at Buckfield in 1863, Josiah Newman set up a fernery, obviously with the help and influence of Edward Newman. There he built an actual grotto, which still exists at Buckfield House on the Bargates Road out of Leominster. So that's Edward. Shall we go on to the next one, please? Oh yes, just to show you what he was capable of, really. Obviously a meticulous observer. I always admire people who can do this sort of thing. But note also what I would call the skill of the drawing, because that will be important for our future talk. The second son was George, and he was a chemist in Leominster. Now, I've not been able to find out much about George. He was the one that died fairly young. He died when he was 39, 1808 to 1847. He was a chemist, ran a chemist shop in Draper's Lane, but I don't know any more about him. Obviously a strong scientific bent in these Newmans. And what we need to think about is how influential Bootham School, that I think all of them attended, although Edward actually went to school at Painswood first. And I'm not sure about that connection either. But Bootham School, as you may well imagine, appears in the records constantly. And obviously a very good school. And of course it's still flourishing, I think. Josiah Newman, if you like, was perhaps the oddball of the four. Not a silly thing to say. What I mean is, he obviously didn't fancy an academic life, and so he took over an existing grocery business. And this is from a directory of the early years of the 20th century. And you might see right at the top, established 1720. Now this is where I have found the history terribly complicated and almost, to me, impenetrable, because I haven't got a lifetime to study the history of the Newman family, fascinating though that might be. I haven't got that time. I think because they refer to it as the old family business, and I think obviously there was a Newman family already in Leominster who had been in the town for several centuries and were already well known and had set up this business in 1720. I think that's why they refer to it as a family business. But what fascinates me is I've not been able to find any record in the 18th century of this business. Now, maybe that I've not tapped the right sources, but I haven't been able to find that. And if anybody does know anything, I'd be glad to know about it. Now, Josiah set up this business, which again was very successful. As you can see from that, he advertised himself as the best grocery and provision establishment in the town. I'm sure we'd all say that, wouldn't we? But he obviously was successful, and his premises were in Broad Street. Next one, please. And that is the premises as they are today. It's quite a big. It's a big house, as you can see, and it's in a prime trading position. And I think the next slide might show us even a bit more of that. Oh no, that shows us going down to the back, because there was a side entrance off Church Street, and that is the way through. And that is interesting. That is interesting because, the next slide please, that leads down, that's the back of 12 and 14 Broad Street, where in fact the first, when Henry Stanley Newman became interested in the adult schools, this is where he first started his adult school, as you'll probably be told later on this afternoon.
Some steps been taken away.
Yes. I've seen the postman trying to get things in through that letterbox. It's not easy. Yes, Josiah, although he was a grocer and provisioner, but he was a very committed Quaker and very interested in the social problems, educational needs of the town. And so when his son came to work in Leominster, we'll deal with that in a moment, he suggested and was the first superintendent of the adult schools, which was set up in Leominster in 1858. Next one, please. Now, this is not one of Eric's photographs. This is something somebody else gave me, and I can't honestly remember where I got this from. And I don't even know which is which. This is a blind leading the blind here. I think this might be George Newman, and this might be Henry Newman, his youngest son. But it might not be. It might be. It might be that this might not be George Newman. But if anybody knows this photograph or knows who these people are, please let me know. I think these are perhaps three of his sons, but I'm not entirely sure. But I was looking for a picture of George Newman, the elder, and I thought that might be him. So that might be. On the other hand, I wonder if it's Josiah. I can't spend any more time on that, because otherwise we'll be here all day. Next one, please. Now, we move on to the next son, who is Henry Newman. Henry Newman, 1818 to 1908. And one thing, apart from George Newman, the chemist who died when he was 39, was the extreme longevity of Quakers in Leominster. Again, I don't know whether this is characteristic. I'm not going to ask how many of you are over 90. But it might be something to do with the way of life, or whatever it is. They were all extremely, well, Henry lived to be 90. Now you will see, this is in the garden of 46 Etnam Street, where he had moved with his father. He came after his education at Bootham School, etc. He came to live with his father in 1826, when his father moved to Etnam Street. And you'll see him there in his latter years. He was 89 at this point, with a gigantic plant standing in the fleshy plant bed. This plant is an agave, which flowered last year, 1907, for the first time in the 40 years it had been in his possession. So all gardeners, please be patient. You might have to wait 40 years. This was the first time the plant had been known to flower in Herefordshire. And you see, I imagine that this is obviously part of his brother's influence, his brother Edward, collecting these rare exotic plants. And we'll see that it's something that runs through the whole family, strangely enough, as we'll see. Now, I don't know, I've not been able to find out what actually Henry did. I'm sure I've seen somewhere that he was, when he first came, he was classed as an invalid. Now, like a lot of invalids, if you remember Thomas Hardy, they didn't think Thomas Hardy would even live. He was born in 1840, he lived to 1928. He lived to be 88. It's a strange thing about some people who were thought to be invalids that they actually go on and live quite long lives. The other report I've seen somewhere, and I can't put my finger on it, was that he was a bookseller. Now, Edward was a writer and a publisher, and it may be that Henry was the commercial arm of that, but I've not been able to trace anything about that. So again, if anybody knows, please let me know. Next one, please. This is where they lived, in 46 Etnam Street. It's a big house. Well, and I think if you go on the walk this afternoon with Dennis, you'll obviously see it. Etnam Street, very, what shall we say, it's got big houses in it. This belonged to the Duke of Norfolk at one time, when he was negotiating to get his clients elected as MPs. Next one, please. But the interesting thing about Henry, and the fascinating thing, which I was absolutely delighted to find, that he was an artist of no mean accomplishment, I think. This is, he loved, he obviously had a great sense of humour, and this is one showing, I think, obviously one of his family, I would have thought, falling from a horse when they've been out by the Leominster Canal. And luckily, a lot of them is dated. This is 1884. Quite a lively sketch, I think. Next one, please. And there they are again, Leominster Canal, when it had frozen over, and the child is being pulled along on a little makeshift sledge. Next one, please. 46 Etnam Street is right opposite the Chequers Hotel. Now, of course, being a Quaker, Henry was very much in favour of abstention for drink. But obviously, it didn't restrict his interest in his surroundings. Next one, please. Because he made some very, very good, lively sketches of life in Etnam Street. This is looking out at the front of the Chequers Hotel, and illustrates the mailman coming by with 2 sacks of mail on a winter's day.
Looks like snow on the roof.
Yes, snow on the roof. Yes. I think they may have had to bring this from Worcester, so it was quite a journey, 26 miles. Hardy. Yeah. Next one, please. And these are some of the characters which he sketched in the porch at the Chequers Hotel. And he even wrote a little verse about the sort of things they were discussing. So, although he, I'm sure he never went inside, he obviously hung about outside enough to hear what they were talking about. And again, you know, this is a great glimpse of social history at that time. This I think is 1850s, and photography, yes, was starting, but you know, there's again a liveliness about this sketch which I think shows you some of the characteristics. And of course, if you tried to take a photograph in those days, people would have had to stand stock still, and it wouldn't have had the same spirit which I think this has got. But he's obviously interested in the costume and, as I say, the talk that went on. Next one, please. And again, here we are. And this one, I don't know whether you can read that, probably not. But it ends with talking about pigs and maggots at the tail. It's all the local farming community. I've got some of these illustrations, and I'll put them out on the table later so you can see. Next one, please. And these are the 2 people that were working there. One was the proprietress, Mrs. Wilkes, and she's talking to the ostler, the man who looked after the horses. I find these fascinating, as I'm interested in local history. The costume, and you know, he's obviously got a very sharp eye for this sort of thing. I don't know who taught him, but it's Did it come from an inspiring art teacher at Bootham School, perhaps? Next one, please. And again, you see an eye for the humorous. This is Etnam Street. This is at the beginning of the century, 1904. Obviously a disgruntled farmer coming away from the market, I would think. Because he's going down Etnam Street, which is away from the market area. A lovely jutting out chin. He summed up the attitude of that chap, I think, very well in just a few strokes there. And the poor old horse or donkey rather pulling him along. Next one, please. We could go on a long time with these. This is at the bottom of Etnam Street, and those of you who live in Leominster will know that at the bottom of Etnam Street now we've got the funny assortment of buildings, including a railway station. And this was before the railway station. That's the black, is it the black line? The white line, isn't it? The white line at the bottom of Etnam Street. A very old public house or inn, and he was obviously, again, interested in the contrast between, well, this was taken before the railway opened, obviously. This was sketched before the railway opened. A wonderful wall there, which must be a pigeon house. Dovecot, yeah. For those of you who know Leominster will see that there's a couple of footbridges there over the River Pinsley, which flowed from round the back of the priory and drove a mill, Pinsley Mill. Next one, please. There's another lady going down Etnam Street in her horse and cart, and you note how he's intending to make a better picture of that. Black hat, crimson, whatever it says. Blouse, is it bandana? Can't see what it says. Band, perhaps, round the head, round her hat. Next one, please. There they are again, those two. This is Wilkes and the horsekeeper. Next one. And there is another disgruntled farmer. Etnam Street and the top end of South Street, just outside this building. I've got a photograph of this outside this building. Was where the horses were sold. So they were sold all the way down Etnam Street and along this top half of South Street. And this is a chap who's either he's bringing his horse for sale, or he's not sold it, or he realises he's bought a babbon and he's having to drag it along. I give lots of talks on local history, and most of the material is 19th century photographs. And I'm always saying, don't forget that these streets would have been muddy and full of cow and horse dung. And here you can see how Henry has actually picked up the muddy conditions on a winter's day. Next one, please. And there's another lady riding into town. You know, you can just see Henry in that house facing out onto that busy street, as it was then, and obviously being attracted by all these characters coming by and all these scenes of Leominster life as it was in the middle of the 19th century. The donkey wouldn't, it tells you there, the donkey wouldn't kick because she'd fixed a piece of wood from its muzzle down to the top of his legs. Now, I'm not a farmer, so I don't know how that works, but anyway, that's what he's written there. And there's a lovely little sketch of Leominster Church there, and a rather comical little rhyme, a Herefordshire riddle. Next one, please. And there's Sarah Hicks, who I think was either one of his servants or worked at the Chequers. Next one, please. Oh yeah, that's getting rather faint. That's another member of the family. And at the bottom there, a member of the Southall family. And I'm not going to have much time to deal with them the way we're going. Right, next one, please. Oh yes, Henry travelled too. He travelled to the Crimea. And when the Crimean War was on, or just about to end, because there's a sketch which you may pick up on the internet of Florence Nightingale, and Henry Newman had travelled with his friend called Jerry Barrett to the Crimea, and either he or his friend sketched Florence Nightingale, and that is in the National Portrait Gallery. Now, as we've seen, Henry was a very accomplished portraitist, if you like, but the style of the picture of Florence Nightingale doesn't represent his style. So I think they've attributed it to this chap called Jerry Barrett, and I think they're probably right. Henry's has got much more life in him. Florence, of course, didn't like to have her portrait painted, so they had to do it surreptitiously. So, you know, again, this is something which I sort of didn't think about, but in the Crimea, when Florence Nightingale was going around these dreadful wards, presumably, if you were a man of influence, perhaps in inverted commas, you could say, oh, I just want to wander around the wards or something and do some sketching. I don't know, but perhaps that's what happened. Anyway, there is one of the Turkish chaps, and one of his local gardeners. He says it's something at the bottom. I've done the taters, missus. So he's just been hoeing the taters. Next one. We should go on all afternoon with Henry. A couple again of lively sketches of servants. Next one. And what's particularly fascinating to people who are interested in Leominster's history, he also sketched this building, the Corn Market, was actually demolished in the 1850s and no longer exists. And this is, again, a comical sketch he's done of a chap sitting in the stocks. The stocks at this time, well, let's put it this way: shortly after this, they stopped using the stocks. But it's nice to have a picture of the Corn Market, which has entirely disappeared. It was in the middle of Corn Square. It's not the Corn Exchange; it's the Corn Market. Next one, please. And then this really blew me away, because, again, for those of you who know Leominster, in Corn Square we have, at the present time, a rather ugly building which used to be the Employment Exchange, put up in the early 1970s. Before that we had a handsome Victorian building called the Corn Exchange, which was built in 1858. Before that we had this marvellous building, half-timbered building, which was pulled down to make way for the Corn Exchange. But there are very, very few illustrations of it. There's perhaps two rather dull photographs, as far as I know. But this, to actually show that building, taken from the Corn Market, and from a side view up Draper's Lane as well, and showing another half-timbered building which has since disappeared, is absolutely marvellous. This was obviously a butcher's shop. You can see the joints of meat hanging in the window. And a wonderful example of our half-timbered vernacular building, sadly gone. But to have that record, I was absolutely blown away when I discovered that amongst these papers. Next one, please. Oh yes. His brother George, the chemist, actually died in Bath, and this is taken in Bath. This is a little sketch. His first trip in a Bath chair, and I wonder if it's his brother actually, although surely he wouldn't if his brother was in such a bad state of health. But anyway, again, another interesting little bit. A man obviously so interested in the society around him. Next one, please. Oh yes. And he sketched, this is in the Church Stretton area, Cardington Valley probably. Next one. And these are, this is a family sketch of the little Newmans. I don't know which ones they are, I haven't gone into that. Again, it's something, so much that one could research here. Next one, please. Yeah, next one, please. I have to scamper on a bit now. One of the, Samuel Southall, I think, signing the pledge. And obviously Henry was very amused by the sight of what I take to be a sword coming out of the back there. Next one, please. Yes, this is the coming towards the end of no, not the end of Henry's life, but his son, I think he was called Josiah, was quite an invalid. He had TB, and so Henry and his wife built the chalet up in Stockenhill Road area, which is an area of rising ground outside of Leominster. And obviously, as you know, the theory was that purer air could help to cure people with tuberculosis. So they built this very elaborate chalet up there. Unfortunately, the son died. But they put a lot of work into this. Next one, please. Well, that's just another photograph of it. It's so interesting because the chalet is covered with inscriptions inside, or was. Unfortunately, this is one that has been demolished. There's lots of housing up there now, and it's been demolished. But it was covered with inscriptions from all sorts of sources. It was built in 1868. All sorts of religious inscriptions from all over the world. Next one, please. And adjoining the chalet, there was a pool that they loved to visit, with a little a boat on it, and a little boathouse, summer house, whatever you want to call it. Also, at this chalet, they had collected lots of plants from various parts of the world, and so the garden was full of exotic plants, and it must have been quite a place, but sadly demolished. It was demolished in 1955 when the area began to be developed. Next one, please. Oh yeah, that's another of his sketches. They were felling a tree in the grounds of the chalet, and the men who were suddenly the tree came down in an unexpected way, and this caused a bit of terror amongst the people chopping it down. Next one. I've got rather fascinated with Henry, I must admit. Next one. Thank you. Josiah had 6 children. No, he didn't. Sorry. This is Henry Stanley Newman, that is Josiah's son. He was the chap that set up the Orphans Homes. Very, very interesting chap. Wonderful chap. Started with his father, the adult schools, the Tracts Association, all sorts of things which I'm sure Helen and other speakers are going to tell you about later. Yes, a marvellous bloke, I think. This is really what interested me in this family in the first place. Next one, this is Josiah's son, so this is the next generation. This is the premises again in 14 Etnam Street. I put that on because this is where the first Orphans press was. Next one, please. And that's the Orphans printing press shop front in Broad Street. Next one, please. Oh yes, oh that's later. Yeah. Next one, please. And here we are again. I don't have the names of them, but I think this is Henry Newman. They do look so similar, Henry and his nephew, Henry Stanley. Next one, please. Next one, please. Next one, please. Yeah, now I've got about 5 minutes to deal with the Southall, so I do apologise for anybody that might be interested in the Southall family. The reason that they're in here is that the Southalls were married into the Prichards, and the Prichards married into the Newmans, and the Southalls, the Newmans and the Prichards are all involved. And the Southalls will go on, as you can see. Thomas, Samuel I, Samuel II, Samuel III, John Southall, John Tertius Southall, Arthur Trusted Southall, too many Johns for me to cope with, really. But the Samuels were too early for me. Next one, please. This is a sketch of John Southall, one of the early Southalls. Sorry, a silhouette. Next one, please. And this is a sketch by Henry Newman, again, of Samuel Southall. And I find this such a lovely drawing, because this is obviously a man of the 18th century who has continued to live into the 19th century, and like many of us, we're still wearing the clothes we wore when we were younger. Obviously that sort of style had very much gone out of fashion by the mid-19th century, but Samuel Southall, and again you can see the character there. I think he summed it up beautifully in that face there. Next one, please. Oh yes, that's another Southall. Next one, please. And this is the Southalls as they came to be in later years. The John Tertius Southall was a linen draper, silk mercer, all sorts of things he was interested. He was involved with selling, and again, like the Newmans, he did well in business. And his son Arthur Trusted Southall bought the Leominster Printing Company, and they set up they bought also with it the Leominster News, and North Herefordshire and Radnorshire Advertiser, and that was the Leominster's paper for 100 years, from 1883 it started in 1880, he took it over in 1883, it continued until it closed in 1983. It wasn't always then in the Southall family, but he was the first, he was the major proprietor. It was taken over by Barrow's newspapers and eventually the Hereford Times, and we have a community newspaper now. We don't have a printed, a proper newspaper, if you like. Yes, they bought. John Tertius bought in John Tertius Southall bought in 1808 the property known as 1A Corn Square. Next one, please. Which is now the tourist office in Leominster. And this is where the first printing works were. Next one, please, I think. Oh, next one. Yeah, this is the front of it, and luckily the doors has still been. That's a tourist. Bob Ellis, who's worked in the tourist office for more years than I can remember. And we've still got the doors on there with the engraved with the Leominster News on it. Next one, please. Oh yes, there we are. I don't know whether you can read that, but it's great to still have those doors, and the adjoining property, which they also own, also have that still engraved on the doors. A nice old Victorian building, actually. And they also owned the land next door, which is where the post office, which is now Wetherspoons, because we don't seem capable of keeping post offices any longer. Post office is squashed into the back of the newsagents, and it's now become a pub. But, right, next one, please. Oh, gosh, yes. Just to conclude with the Southalls, the Southalls have been in Leominster for many, many years. As you may have managed to glimpse from that family tree, they began in Staffordshire, but they obviously moved into Leominster in the 18th century. And again, I think they made their money through leather, I think, at first. Interestingly, as I mentioned at the beginning, the way Quakers were obviously very astute businessmen, because George Newman, I think it was, George Newman, actually bought shares in the first Stockton and Darlington Railway right back at the beginning, and I think that might be where he got his wealth from, because as you know, the railway expanded very quickly, and fortunes were lost and sold. And I think he obviously bought and sold, and he obviously got his fortune from that, I think. This is West Lodge at the top, at the end of Rainbow Street, and that's on there because this was the Southall family home, built in 1829. The family lived there, if my notes are correct, from 1745, not in this particular property because it was built in 1829, in a property called the Farm in Leominster, which is over the other side of the ring road now. This is the West Lodge. Over the other side is an old property called the Farm, which is now, to those of you who live in Leominster, Philpot's nursery. And the ground has obviously been split by the ring road. And they lived there from 1745 to 1911. Two old ladies lived there for a long time, and I was talking to the proprietor of Philpot's nursery the other day, and it was her grandfather who bought it. She said, I think in 1923. So they were an old established Leominster family, and they set up there again a tremendous garden behind here. There was a lot of land between these two properties. I haven't got a picture of the other property, unfortunately. And those properties were full of specimen trees and great gardens. So again, this theme of horticulture runs through all these families. And the Southalls and the Newmans, whenever somebody from the Newmans did something, you can bet your bottom dollar one of the Southalls was involved as well. Support with the Orphans Homes, with education, with sanitation. John Tertius, there were two big epidemics, cholera and something else in the middle of the 19th century, typhoid, no, it was scarlet fever. And 40 people died in one, 39 in the other, and the government insisted that new waterworks were put in place. And John Tertius Southall became known as Waterworks Southall because of his campaigning to get these health improvements made. So they were making a big contribution in all aspects of life, the Newmans and the Southalls. Next one, please. I think we're nearly there. Yeah, I said I would do something about the Neilds. I haven't managed to do that, and it's just as well because I'm out of time. Theodore Neild was born in Cheshire. He was a very successful academic. He took over, he was the principal of Dalton Hall in Manchester, and he bought Grange Court, which is, I hope those of you who don't know it will be able to see it this afternoon. Brought Grange Court in 1907. Grange Court was our old market hall, which had been moved from the centre of town to a park area, not very far from here. And it's been recently restored. It's a lovely building, and but it was a private house after it had been taken down and moved. And Theodore Neild bought it in 1907.
Is that plant?
Yes, there's that plant again, you're right. It must be, I don't know whether they've transplanted it or whether it's a plastic bubble of the other plant or what it is. I think moving it would be great, but if it would be a marvellous job. But whether it's another example, I haven't investigated that. Next one, I think we're just about there. Oh, that's just a photograph of them at Grange Court. Next one. Next one, please. Oh yes, and that's finally, I think he died in 1928, but the year before, I think it was, they had a great family get together. Theodore Neild, again, I haven't had a chance to investigate his life in Leominster. He was a JP, all of them were JPs, most of them became councillors, county councillors, magistrates, all this sort of thing. They were really pillars of 19th century Leominster life, and it has been a scamper through. I'm sorry about that, but it's a fascinating story, and if anybody has got any contribution they can make or wants to see some of these pictures, I'll be very happy to provide it. Thank you very much.